Hello.
Oh,
Also making coffee.
how you feeling?
Yeah, I feel just crappy, not worse than that.
Yeah,
But that's okay. I think Emily's a bit more crappy. Edgar had a crappy day yesterday, really low energy, not very well at all. And yeah, it's okay.
well, I'm glad here. I mean, yes, at least it's not quite the sort of, existential thing it was 2 years ago. But even so, I must say, I'm not exactly. I'm still being careful.
Yeah, we thought we've been very careful. It may have been from school Edgar got it.
Oh,
I
I mean,
still
I
will
think
not.
it's
No. I'm just going to say that the original variant was all about the lungs. This one seemed about the brain.
yeah.
So that's why I'm, quite paranoid and not too thrilled. But anyway, it is what it is for a while.
No, I was going to say. I mean, I think. I mean that we're getting to the point anyway where eventually I'm sure we'll all be getting it because I mean hopefully it's on the trajectory of becoming something less to well on its way to being ordinary flu, which is no fun either.
Well, maybe China is looking a bit scary, but anyway.
Yeah.
So I saw from Adam that him and Brandel were having a pre-meeting for half an hour.
Oh, cool.
They were planning to have it here, but then they decided to have it just audio. It's about how to use hubs.
Okay. Yeah. And you'll see I'm making slight progress. What I'm learning, I think, and I can sort of say this for folks when they come in, is I still not I still can't quite figure out whether this app is putting things where I think they are, because I reckon I should see a vertical line of all the things that are in the same year, and I'm wondering if it's parallax or not. And the other thing I'm seeing is that even the small amount of data I'm putting in seems to be too big for Noda's space. Now that's not the interesting part of that is, am I putting too much information in? Is the space not big enough? Or it's this problem of how close do you put things and they're still useful. Now bear in mind, Noda's space won't be infinite like the sort of thing that Brando was doing of putting Bob's mural up. But it is sort of quite interesting if you start to say, well, okay, if I want to explore with information, because what I'm sort of replaying is my expectation based on no knowledge was, well, I'll take this idealized 2D, deliberately 2D, I haven't put any Z order in it thing, and I will put it in this virtual space and I will see something that looks like I expect. And so far, now I can get it, now I actually get it to import. It still doesn't look like what I expect, which is interesting because now I have the problem of, I think I know what I want it to look like in before I start tinkering with it. But I don't know how to stipulate what that is. And it makes me start to wonder whether I want to be planning a more of a wraparound display, in which case I definitely am not that good at sort of geometry and maths that I can sit down and work out the algorithm that's going to tell me what X, in flat world, what X, Y, Z, hello Peter, what X, Y, Z coordinates I want to use to have my simple diagram mapped around me.
Just trying to find, you tweeted this, didn't you?
Yeah, I did just now. I'll put it in the sidebar when people. Well, I could. It's probably easier if I show it on my screen. Then, well, I can put it in the sidebar anyway. But I'll wait until a few more folks arrive before I do it.
Hi, Peter.
Good morning.
So Brandel and Adam are working a little bit on how we can meet in hello, Fabian. I just saw Adam said a little earlier today that him and
Here it comes.
Instead of me saying it 3 times, he can say it himself. Hello, Adam.
I don't know.
Did you meet up with Randall?
Nope. Fabian and I was going to.
Oh, really? I thought it was
Wait.
Brandon. I'm so sorry. I didn't read your messages properly. Hey, I can blame it on COVID, right? Oh, it says right here, Fabian. So anyway, you guys were away working on stuff, and you can speak for yourself. I can shut up for a minute.
You want a briefing from our meeting? Fabian, do you have a one-liner?
Yes, Mozilla Hubs is amazing. Unperfect, but could be a quite good basis for building different proof of concept or prototypes. The good, the bad, and the ugly is that the good, you can do quite a bit with it. The bad is, well, there is no bad. The ugly is that's quite complex, and the documentation is far from perfect. But Mozilla is still investing in it.
Alert from Google Chrome www.
So yeah, I think we discussed a bit on the different implementations, and that it could be a good basis to tinker, regardless of the social aspect. A lot of the interesting tools, let's say manipulation of 3D objects, sharing PDF, going across rooms, setting up a server, and having permanent of assets so that we can, let's say, set up a room, put documents left and right, extract images from documents, then we can go back whenever we want. And also in terms of, let's say, pricing, to have our own server, it's relatively affordable. So, well, that was a quick overview of hubs and the possibilities. And a little addendum is that I have a bias that I already invest quite a bit of time in hubs. So yeah, I have a preference for it. But that being said, Hubs is based on A-Frame, and A-Frame is based on 3GS, and 3GS is basically the de facto standard of 3D on the web. That's kind of what everybody's using. So overall, building prototype for Hubs, even if Hubs were to disappear for some weird reason in 6 months or 1 year, I mean, it would not be wasted time. Voilà.
Yeah, that's very useful indeed. Adam, you want to say the same thing or slightly different, maybe?
I mean, I think it could be worth to try it.
I'm just going to email Brandel because he may have thought we stuck with the English timing. Hang on. Okay. All caps. We are on now.
Poor chap's probably having a lion for an hour.
Yeah, he deserves it. Oh, okay. I sent it with all caps, but it's a smiley face in there, so should be all right.
No, but I think it's worth trying just to get a feel for it, and it's inclusive enough. So if Peter waits for the future unicorn headset, then he can still join in with the browser, have an avatar, so he doesn't have to show his face. If he can have whatever avatar he wants, and it also has that kind of spatial audio, and so it's the co-presence thing is very nice, and I think it's a good way to try out working together, and we can do some small experiments. It also supports linking, so we can kind of have portals to different rooms if we want to have special project rooms, but also we could have links to the outside web to different prototypes, so we can have kind of a gallery of the prototypes we have in VR, so we just jump to the next one, which is very nice, I think.
Yeah, I think that sounds absolutely amazing. So also, I think this is a good point, Mark. You started last time talking a little bit about Noda, but you've done further work.
Yeah, I just shoved a screenshot in the sidebar. It's been interesting. So I basically took out of the data set we were playing around with last year. I took the most linked single paper with all the things it cited and all the things that cited it, which is about 70, 80 nodes. And that was my start. I thought, I'll just put that into Noda. Well, that's taken me 4 or 5 days. I think it's fair to say that I'm probably pushing where the app is at. So when they said there is, if you subscribe, there's a CSV input, I think we're not much further than probably someone rapidly scrabbling to do it hydraulically every time a file arrives. And that's just life of startup. So that's where we are. What's really quite interesting, and I don't know if you've seen the picture, what I can do is I can put up on my screen and share it. Where are we? Share. Go. Share. So hopefully, are you seeing this one?
Yep.
That's
good.
much better. I tried to make it bigger on, hi, Brandel. So
Yeah.
we stuck to American time, and Fabian and
Good.
Adam will have an update in a minute. And Mark
Thank you.
is now talking about Noda.
So, and I mean, nothing. There's nothing particularly show-stopping here. But the interesting thing that comes out of it is one of the things I ended up having to do is I've literally made this is all deliberately in 2D. These settings are all on the same Z plane, and I deliberately added coded in effectively an x-axis because I'm trying to see if these things align. And in fact, and the devs were saying they thought it might be some parallax error, but I have my doubts. So I'm wondering if there's some kind of weirdness going on when things come in. Because the thing I've been reflecting in now, I've been able to get to the stage that you see in front of you is, well, where do I start? So one of the things is when I'm sitting in actual reality, how do I wrap my head around putting the data into the 3D space in a form that when I see it is going to make any sense? And I think I'm coming to the realization that it's just not quite as simple as taking my 2D data table and dumping it into a space. Now, I don't know how big the sort of Noda sort of holodeck is. And one issue is knowing how the on-screen units map to any other unit of Axis. And I'm clearly running way ahead of the app sort of any form of documentation on this, which always adds to the fun. So it's endless experimentation. And you can see at the top of the picture, the lines going effectively through the roof, which doesn't seem odd to me. But one problem, for instance, is if I go into Noda, I have no way to ask it where it is in space. So in fact, not showing up here is, I did actually put a sort of null island of 000 in, but that didn't render because I put curly brackets around the name, and their CSV parser is not that great. So I keep finding new ways to break it in ways that I wouldn't even bother about with normal CSV work. They even had another interesting thing I found out is they had chosen 2 really weird Unicode characters, which they were going to use for things like line breaks, which says to me that probably the team doing this aren't very used to working with data, because to take a character that most people wouldn't know how to generate with a keyboard and use that as a quite important part of the data structure strikes me as exotic choice, to say the least. Anyway, that's sort of it is what it is. And if that gives anyone ideas, or anyone who's sort of, Fabian and Randall people want to take the data that's there or a version of it and sort of play that against what they're doing with their own tools, just let me know and I'll find you the appropriate data. Thanks.
It's really useful to see. So go ahead, Frode.
Yeah, no, just briefly. I mean, Peter has his hand up, but just really briefly, Peter, excuse me, Mark, what is the central node that everything points to?
Okay, so that's the most linked paper, because I should have colored the 2 things differently. Basically, the idea is you're seeing a paper in 1998 that is the most linked paper, most cited, and in fact, the most citing paper in the whole I think it's one of Mark Bernstein's papers, so Kelsa Prees, called Patterns in Hypertext. That's fairly seminal in this area. But so everything to the left of it on the x-axis, which is skewed slightly for us at the moment. So the line of red dots you see is the axis along, that's the x-axis along which everything's plotted. And the way I did it was I did I sort of I did a scaling slightly, but effectively every orange or blue box is a paper. Short papers are blue, long papers, full sort of 10, 12 page papers are orange. Everything to the left of the node is something being cited. Everything to the right is citing it. And I can make that clearer. Again, the really big problem with a tool like this is because there's no documentation yet, it's really difficult to know how things look until they turn up, but you don't know how to get them in there. And then when you're in there, you can't really work it out. You almost need to go in, build lots of things in different sizes, drop them. It does have an email export, which sends you a CSV back. Then you have to figure out their somewhat mnemonic conventions and work out what these numbers and things mean in terms of what you might plot. And this strikes me as probably not an atypical thing we're going to see lots of in this sort of in-out process, unless groups like this come up with some better ways of approaching this.
Peter?
Yes, I was wondering whether anyone has tried to crack the nut of Tinderbox liquid interoperability. It'd be really nice if I could have a map view in Tinderbox automatically get translated into a map view in an exported liquid document and vice versa.
I think, well, after watching our last meetup and watching Brendel, playing around with the stuff in the liquid file, the one bit I know I could reasonably easily do is I could make a JSON file from Tinderbox, so going one way, and like as not, I could probably produce something. If I ingested a JSON file as a Tinderbox note, I could then use some action code to create a map from it. That's sort of not fully, that's not two-way, but it's getting part of the way there.
Yeah, I think there's a good synergy between the two tools.
Yeah, part of the excitement to me of doing this is spatial hypertext in 3D, which is something I've only been waiting, well, my working life for, Any other questions? I'll stop sharing.
So if you would like to add another dimension, what would that be?
Well, I deliberately left it blank because I thought, well, if I use all my dimensions up at once, I won't know what anything looks like, and I won't know. So the idea was I should at least know, well, I'm starting with a flat thing, and I was thinking, well, I might, if I had more variation than I have here, I mean, I could step all the blue notes forward and the yellow ones back or something. In that sense, this isn't a very good exploratory set of information because it doesn't have that sort of axis of uncertainty or variation built into it. And I'll have to go away and pick something better now. Now I've got this sort of working, which was really, this I thought I knew the data well enough that I could figure out. I mean, things I've had to drop out. I was putting the abstracts in there, but that just broke every which way I tried to protect the data. It just broke the CSV parser. Plus the fact that you can't actually read it. There is a note field that you can sort of read on the Noda thing, but it's 1-2 line box this big. And when it imports data, it doesn't line wrap it. So it's effectively unreadable. And I think the other thing I'm learning from this is that in the 3D space, if you are moving data in and out, or not even moving the data, but you're thinking across the sort of 2D, 3D space, you actually need to have information when you're in the 3D space saying where you are and what, so that you can actually relate maybe a change you've made in 3D to the mental picture you may have in a flatter thing. So if I go into the picture you're looking at the moment, I can interrogate a node, but I don't know where I don't know its X, Y, Z coordinates. For instance, I don't know, and things that I now would want to do with this that it can't do is for instance, I want to jump to a certain node. or do a find, move me there. Where am I in relation to 0? How far am I? And even in this, start playing with some of the network things, like, how many hops am I on the network away from this thing? Because again, this is not a good example because it's just one node linked to lots of things, but I wanted that simplicity. But realistically in this space, the kind of thing you're doing is, oh, well, why isn't this thing linked to that? How far away is it? Because often the links have semantic value. They're indicating some sort of relationship, whether lifted from the data or applied by the analyst. So I haven't really started playing with it because it's taken me, it's taken about 4 days of solid things, because I hit all the things. Trying to do 2FA when you've got a headset on is nigh on impossible. Every time I do something, I have to take the headset off, put my glasses on to read something else that it asked me for, that it could have asked me for in advance. So I think that's another lesson to think about, that not everyone is going to. I had 2020 eyesight when I was 20. I don't know. So one of the obvious things that I would think about doing when moving stuff into space is think about all the things you need to know. So for instance, to get this in, I put in Dropbox, and I go in the in-app browser, go to Dropbox, and that opens up. But there are weird things, like some things have to be double-clicked, but others don't, and there's no indication, no feedback. And it doesn't, all the things you might need to, and at some point I needed my Oculus pin, like I know that because I don't use it day in, day out. So all these things, someone who's actually thinking in terms of process rather than just visual design would have said, right, before you get on the ride, make sure your knapsack contains the following items, because you're going to need them. And the other thing that Oculus seems to lack is a sort of bridging notepad. It sort of needs a way that you can, things like putting, 24 character passwords onto some kind of clipboard so you can paste them into things. Because I found myself trying to read, one password will let me show a password in big letters on the screen, which I can just about read if I put the Oculus right close up to the screen. And that's a real problem, because outside VR, we're all being asked to use, longer, more secure passwords, use 2FA and all this sort of thing. And it's clearly not integrated in any meaningful fashion. It's also difficult to get information out. To get this out, screenshots are really difficult. There isn't a good screenshot tool. You ask to do a screenshot, and then I think there's a little red light which you hope is pointing roughly at the center of what you want to do, but you can't frame the shot. There isn't a thing that says, I'm going to take this much. It then takes a picture. Then it supposedly syncs. But the only way I've made that work is to just keep mashing the sync on off inside Oculus until eventually it decides to get round to syncing it to the phone or the OS app. At which point, it's difficult to share it from Oculus unless you want to give all your information to Mr. Zuckerberg, which I do not. So I needed to get it out. Once I've got it into the phone or the OS app, what I'm doing at the moment is I'm messaging myself the image so I can get it out. So the Oculus doesn't even have a way to just save the wretched thing to file from a native OS app, which just means it's remarkably dumb or just evil, or probably both. So another thing that in the interim stage, until we really just can live in VR and AR, is there's a niche for someone to make a decent screenshot app, because until you can easily share with multiple people, a screen grab like this is the best way you can show somebody roughly where you are. But I can't really, because I've got no real control of the picture that gets taken. So that's another interesting sort of learning thing. It's been fun. I don't want to sound too glass half empty. I found it harder than I'd hoped, but that's normal for this kind of thing. And just kind of stoked that I got something in there at all. Fabienne.
So there are too many points, so I'm going to forget some. The first immediate one, let's say for me, is it's very interesting and extremely precious to have this kind of review, because I'm not that honest with my own work. So when I think or discuss about concepts, honestly, I pansetize a bit. Whereas when I see an actual tool built by someone else, not by me, then I can be a lot more honest and even critical. Whereas if I show you something, then it's a step along a process, but that allows me to be a bit more conceptual, philosophical, whatever you want to call it. So I think that's also the beauty of testing other tools, or like also the demonstration we had like 2 weeks ago, that this is what exists today. And you listed, Mark, like a lot of things to be fixed, but it's very interesting because it shows precisely like the point of frictions versus a concept. Like this is, so I think this is really, really great to have this kind of things.
Well, the app, in a sense, is a minor walled garden of its own. And one of the, I mean, she's that lovely phrase. The provocation of this screenshot is I'm hoping that some of the people sitting here thinking, well, that's rubbish. I could make something far better with the same information. Yeah, because part of the thing is I'm putting this into something where clearly at the moment they're thinking about sort of handmade diagrams in two senses of the word. One is you're going in there with a good, but Node only supports controllers, but that's by the by. But you're going in and you're making all the little dots in space. But what I realized from that is realistically, you're also making quite a small diagram. You're not making a diagram that's in their world 2 miles long. And this is the learning thing about just taking a data set. You know, what could possibly go wrong? Well, things, and also we got things that are off the graph. Although I know that in theory they shouldn't be. That's the next thing to resolve. And it may be a glitch in my data, but I don't think so. But again, if there's anything in sort of from this or similar to this that gives anyone an idea for some of the tools you guys already have. I mean, one of the things I did think about, well, you know, this thing of when they said, well, it might be a parallax effect, that you're not seeing the sort of the Y neat segmentation into the sort of columns of dots along the Y-axis, you know, that would line up with those little red dots at the bottom. I did wonder whether, okay, is that telling me that what I really need is, I actually need the visualization wrapped around me? Or would that just confuse me in a totally different way? Because we now have the problem also that, you know, the state of the art, this issue about, well, what's in focus and what isn't. So you definitely, that's the other thing I think I've realized is you interact with the data in a very different way. So, you know, in my mind's eye, I envisage myself standing in this space like the master of all I survey, sort of busy moving things around. No, you're constantly pulling, moving, trying to get something this close so you can read it. And so until that technical burden is sort of a boundary is passed, that's a further limitation, I think, to doing exploratory work with data in the way that I envisaged.
So
simply, yep.
You, Mark, also today you've been working on. So you guys know that we do all the meetings except for the special guest host meetings. We run just machine learning Sonix.ai to do the transcription. And Mark today was spending an inordinate amount of time clearing up from our last meeting. But I give you full permission to do that for today, because I think what you are saying now is really, really crucial. And I don't think you should necessarily turn it into an article unless you want to.
Yeah.
Just like Fabienne says, this is real. This is the state of the problems today. It's really good for us to learn about these things. So yeah, have fun. Also, it seems that there are no deep David Bowie fans in the group. That's very disappointing. Did you not read my reply to Adam? I'm not immune to your consultation because there will be changes. I am so disappointed in everyone. Just thought I'd put that on record.
Actually, a point on this, a very brief thing, practical point on the Sonix related to the journal. I mean, I was helping Fred anyway. I went through and I actually was very impressed by Sonix, is the first thing I'd say. Much more impressed than being told about it when I actually used it. The main problem it has is we tend to talk about, weird tools that haven't yet made it into anyone's vocabulary yet. So that's where it gets confused.
We
We
can train the vocabulary bit, but it's not so easy to do. I think you and I should spend some time trying to figure that out.
It's not even that, because what will happen is we'll have a discussion, and especially, sort of Fabian or Brandel may show us some, quite new tool that not many people know about, that, and the point is it's always going to be ahead of any vocabulary set at this point. So that doesn't bother me unduly, but that's the polishing I was really doing, was just going through trying to find some of those. And there are one or two that I couldn't quite get, which one thought is that because Sonix very easily lets you take a timestamp out, that as long as if the YouTube video has the same start time as the thing that's inside Sonix, it wouldn't be difficult to go to an individual and just drop them by whatever means, an email or something, say, look, at timestamp X, what's this word? There's going to be, it's going to be either a name of a person or a, some new, software code library or something like that, or name of a product. The other indistinct things, or just us all mumbling as we talk, is minor. I don't think that really worries. But one of the things when I was working on the last journal thing was to also, when going through the conversations, was to try and pick up these effectively brands and make sure they're linked in the PDF, so that if someone's reading it, they can then go find this thing. I'm also mindful of Fabian saying as I was reading the transcript about code. And I think one of the ways to deal with that with the code samples in the short term is if we can find a code coloring plugin to put into the WordPress, the answer might be to just put those code samples on the WordPress as a post and link to them in the journal. And that's probably robust enough for the short term time in which we have this problem, because I absolutely get Fabian's point about the fact that, yeah, okay, so I know it's code because it says code before and it says code end at the end, but that's not the way that one likes to consume it. And it does help a lot to have a monospace font and some coloring and stuff, but I think we're going to have to park that external to the PDF at this point. But if it's on a link, I don't think that should be problematic.
Fabian, you still have your hand up. Do you have more points on this?
Yes, I have numerous more points.
Okay, please go ahead.
The first thing is, I don't know how many people are familiar with YubiKey, but they are like physical tokens to log in, or to log in or do anything basically as a physical two-step authentication. And some of them are USB-C, so you can plug them, let's say in an Oculus Quest or another standalone device. I'm not sure in terms of support how far we are, but just to say this could be also a way to safely authenticate so that you can open actually private or secure document. That being said, and as Mark said, there is another Mark who is more interested in your data. So as long as we keep on using a headset like that, it's private up to a certain point. But there are ways basically to have physical tokens, or even one of the things I was trying to explore. I'll briefly share my screen.
Yeah, let me stop. Sorry, I'll stop.
Is to address a bit the point of, again, forgetting about the authentication, but sharing files. And I think it's quite interesting when we forget the popular paradigm as VR for games, but rather as a tool. Because if it becomes a tool, it's not, a game is isolated, like there is nothing else but the game. But here we talk about text or other kind of documents and how they relate one to another. So it's completely different. And I think in that sense, having a file system and browsing it starts to become important, because indeed you're going to forget some of the files you need. So I started to re-implement something I've done in the past, which is some of my file systems, and I can browse through. or some of the files that I haven't done yet, but to load them. For example, if this was not a video file, but a liquid file, send it, let's say, to Brendel's viewer. Why do I show it, besides that it starts to work a bit again, is that it's on my local network. So even if you were to use this IP address, that would be totally useless for you. But it means I can connect to it on my Quest and then have all access to all the files however I want without sharing it to the rest of the world. And without using also like I could still use multi-factor authentication, but this is also a rather convenient way. I can also I can share it on my server, and then I can add ahead some authentication mechanisms. But yeah, I think that starts to address some of the question of bringing the content in. And that also starts to bring new question, let's say in terms of file type association. For example, if we see a .liquid file, is there a reader in BR? Can it open a URL-based file? Can it write back using an API, let's say posting the PDF or the content back out? And then when you start to have a file system, file type association, you're not at an OS, but you start to get back some of the basic tools of what we're used to, basically. So yeah.
Well, that's very important and useful. So we definitely need to think about that and how to collaborate on that. Hi, Raphael. You're coming into lots of different updates here, which is great. Now, a little update on the blog and so on, and that is at Mark's suggestion, I've gone through our website, and all the transcripts now have a link to the chat log. And all the chat logs have a link to the transcript for that same session. I don't expect anyone will go in and really read it yet. And a lot of it, apart from Mark's effort today, there's going to be quite a few errors in the transcript, but it's better than nothing kind of thing. Also, all the books now have basic .liquid documents accessible. So you should be able to extract the metadata we have there. The metadata from book 1 is very sparse because it was made in InDesign. The metadata from 2 is better. But one thing I think we should as a community work on, I think we talked about it before, is a glossary together for the journal. So the first thing for the glossary, of course, is everybody's bios that I ask about once a week about, and I have most of them, so that's not why I'm bringing it up. But that kind of thing, things that are quite neutral, things that are a bit more difficult to define, we should also look at. But we are putting the glossary definitions in the journals now, and they are extractable as Brandel has done. And finally, this guy, Nathan, who wasn't very happy with Visual Meta, who wrote the email that you all saw, I think, he has now commented on my brief article on why PDF on the website. I put a link in here to the chat, and I'm going to have to comment back to him. I think my comment will basically be, yes, we are also doing HTML, and we certainly are doing JSON. Adam, did you want to mention something about HTML in this context? The message you sent earlier?
I tried to, or I've started doing a kind of automatic conversion from the liquid or RTFD file to HTML, because I think we need to speak HTML whatever we do, because we want to display web pages and other kind of documents that may be exportable to HTML, because most word processors and systems can at least export to HTML in some way. And RTF is kind of a bit older interchange format, and I think for the future it could be good to at least speak HTML. So having automatic conversion will help us mean until author may or may not get HTML export, but you have to look into that, as you said, Frode.
Yeah, no, I think that's really, really great. Now, Jacob, if he ever gets his head out of the water for the other projects he's working on, we already have HTML exports, but it's tied to WordPress upload. So all he needs to do is say, you know, don't put it there, put it here. So it's really kind of annoying that he's so busy. So I'm just going to reply to Nathan's comment saying, yes, we're doing all of that, but for the archival long-term, can you please let us do visual meta without moaning? You know, all his arguments are correct. All of Adam's argument that have gone back and forth are correct. So that's why we have to do both. Anyway, that was my updates, but any questions on the bloggy, journal-y type of things from anyone before I put my hand down? Mark?
I do. Fabian, do you have a question first?
No, because it's backward. It's
Oh, sorry. Okay. Just a very quick one. It's really to say to people, I mean, one of the things I found, again, through working through the last thing on the journal was I was, you know, one of the things that really stands out is when we have these sort of conversations, especially when people are sort of showing off kit, there's mention of quite a few frameworks and things. And this is all useful and hard to come by stuff for people who are sitting further from the conversation. So I'm trying to sort of capture at least what they are, like a name and a website. It's probably too detailed, too minor and too detailed to be a glossary term. And so I'm open to, it's a work in progress, and B, I'm open to ideas as to whether they just turn up as references at the end, or whether they want to, again, perhaps be punted into a resource that's more on the website, because a number of these things may only last for a few years before something, you know, more wonderful takes over. So I don't know the answers, but in my vaguely editorial hat, I'm trying to capture some of this for the wider things, especially for the work that Raphael and Alan are doing, reaching out to other people in terms of communicating what we're doing. So if I'm not capturing enough, or I'm capturing too little, do please let me know. And by all means, by a side channel if it's more appropriate. I might not.
I think that's okay. I think we can go back now to Fabian, to those comments.
For Nodine network also, or analysis, or playing with networks or graph, first I can recommend Cytoscape, which is a graph analysis tool, and there is a JavaScript version. So to have not just displaying, let's say, with a force, forgot the name, but let's say physics-based, where the nodes push against each other to separate properly, and much more advanced function, like how central some nodes of the graph are, some actual graph analysis tools. That's a really great tool, and it's relatively easy to go from Cytoscape within. It's not like D3, yeah, force directed graph. But there are different layouts for this, and then to go from this to a tool to do a graph analysis could be quite interesting. The one thing that is a bit tricky, and I think most of us experience this, is the kind of tension between an abstract visualization of a graph. Yes, thanks. Thanks, Mark. That's this one. It's if you add a node, it breaks everything, like spatially thinking. If we use VR with the idea that there is some stability and we get comfortable with manipulating it, this just doesn't work. So there are some ongoing, I think it's current research basically on data visualization to say that you can add some constraints the same way the nodes push against each other. You can add constraint to say with each step you try to minimize the displacement of the nodes, but it's quite it's current research, but I think that's one of the tension of abstract graph. That being said, I think I haven't played much with Noda, so that's a totally naive comment. But displaying a graph in VR, and Brendel, you did it with a liquid graph last week, it's not too complicated. But then it becomes the question of, I believe that's a bit what Mark you were saying, what kind of interaction is missing that is interesting? Should changing the display or the visualization make us able to see the structure? should finding the central nodes, what are those that make the manipulation not just maybe enjoyable, but actually useful? So I don't know if extending Noda to bring such functions or starting from scratch or something else still would be more interesting.
Commenting on the last thing, you could always use a third dimension if you have a flat object like a traditional graph for your own stuff, your notes or bringing out nodes or user interaction elements. You always have that as a kind of a place. Of course, you have lots of rooms. You can have that and many other things. But for example, with Mark's graph, when we did this in 2D, there was always a lack of room. We couldn't display the actual PDF documents when you clicked on the node. We wanted to have the abstracts, and it was interfering with the. So we have lots of space for pulling things out and also pulling collections together. If you find different interesting papers, if you use it for some sort of, I want to read these couple of papers in this field, then you can pull them out and put them in a, not in a hidden list, but actually there as a 3D manifestation. I will come back to the other comment later. Brandon?
Yeah, it's a super cool. So this is way back to Mark's screenshot and demonstration of pulling in that data. It's really, really cool to see that information kind of portrayed like that. It does look like the visibility of it is being clipped by that top grid plane, and so that's sort of part and parcel of just the fact that the people building the application weren't particularly thinking about the scale of the information that people are expecting to be able to kind of navigate themselves within, which is kind of fine. But what it sort of does beg the question of is what a given view and visualization is essentially for, and so one of the benefits of virtual reality and digital space in general is the sort of the maneuverability of it and the modifiability of it. So you could potentially, have that view of it scaled down. So I think Raphael didn't see the view. So if you could pull that up again, Mark. Oh no, you don't care.
No, bring it up. Yeah, it's a nice background.
No, I did this for. I haven't seen.
Right. Yeah.
So you want me to put it up?
Yes,
this
please.
is Brazilian for haven't seen. Do show.
Yeah, we'll do. We'll do.
Excellent. So, in the spirit of getting into the virtual reality stuff, I mean, Mark, actually, you're probably a better introducer of this.
Can people see that screen? All right. Sorry, my screens are jumping all over the place. I got three of them, and everything's the right. Right. Okay. So you can see the picture, which is a good thing. Frode, yes. Well,
no. I was just trying to make my hand match. Sorry.
I see what you're doing there. Something else useful I learned. I now know what booping snoots are. That's an interesting transcription problem.
ACM timeline?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
VR space? Okay.
There is basically one of the apps I found available in Oculus at the moment is called Noda. It's at a fairly early stage, and one of the things they offered was a CSV import. So I duly signed up for that, and I thought I'll put a small amount of data in. So it's about, well, it's quite fragile getting the data in. But the idea was there's one paper within the overall data set that links to a lot of papers and is cited by them. And it probably wasn't clever to use the same color for inbound and outbound links, but that's why you're seeing this sort of starburst pattern. At the center of it is the most linked paper. But it does show a number of things in that I deliberately only did it in 2D when I put it in, because I didn't know what I wanted to use the third dimension for. But I still couldn't quite work out whether things were in the right place, which is why I've actually added an axis down the bottom. So that's the time scale. And one of the things you can rapidly see that it's only 30 years, but it's already going past out of eyesight, really. Which also something else we touched on is that the screenshot tools inside Oculus are somewhat limited, and you have very little control of actually what you don't really know what you're taking a picture of. And as Brandel's just commented, some things clearly are going outside the display space that's available. And in fact, I think in this, I'm already sitting on the floor, so I can't make any more vertical space by just moving the whole thing down inside what's effectively like a big holodeck. But it's a start. The other things that I just observed now it's up here, and thinking to the comments just made, is that I was thinking that really, well, rather than trying to make a visualization and pass a sort of a CSV or a JSON or something into a document, really I sense that what I should be doing is producing a nice sort of, so like an R-style tidyverse table, just a big data table, and then using probably a web space and, well, pick your library, web library inside the VR space to actually make this, or indeed a much better visualization. That's one lesson I take from this. I don't think this sort of tool, this particular tool, and no disrespect to it, is really probably really designed for this, or not yet. It's really designed for you to stand in a sort of produce stuff at arm's length. And I'm imagining, I wouldn't be at all surprised if most of the things are probably in 20, 30 nodes at the most, and this is 70. And that's just a small fraction of what I intended to put in, because I thought if I put everything in, I'll never be able to see anything. And even the small subset is actually quite confusing. Before I take it, Raphael, do you have any questions, or I'll then take it back down?
Not really a question, but just a small comment. When we think of 3D space, and we think of data visualization in 3D space, we're always using to the full extent X and Y, you're getting depth and width and everything. And if we think about, in real world, how we organize things, we end up flattening things sometimes as well. So sometimes we don't have the depth that we have in VR. So it's a different experience, and it's something that we're not used to going too much depth, or having different layers of depth of things, right? So that's something I'm trying still to get my head around, what the best way to deal with is. So usually when I see clusters and things like that, I think it's messy. There's no structure, even though it's all connected to a single point. I can't seem to grasp the hierarchy of it.
Well, I would just say that this is so for deliberately, because I was working through so many unknowns at the time, this is deliberately planned to be 2D in terms of the ingest. But the idea was that left me a dimension I could then, because once I'm in there, I can actually pull and move all these things around. But I did find myself thinking, well, to what end?
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay.
I'll stop sharing.
I've overlapped my hand there. Right, so that's an interesting thing at the end there, which goes into my comments, which is, sorry, Emily's asking if Edgar's downstairs. Sorry about that, bad timing. Right, the original Mac was amazing, partly because it could do so little. The file system was absolutely fine for, the 12 things you could fit on a floppy or whatever it was. So I think Noda kind of speaks to that a little bit. So the kind of things that Raphael was talking about now, the kind of interactions. So Raphael, I don't think you were here yet, and Brandel, you got part of it, is Adam and Fabienne talked about how we can move into Mozilla hubs for our meetings, which I really would like them to recap now. I think it would be really, really useful after Fabienne has gone through his questions and points, because the thing that I have mentally gotten through more and more as I'm working on the demo things is, where are you going to put this stuff, right? It has to be, there has to be frames, so to speak, in the VR environment, because if you open up lots of different things in a VR room, instantly gets messy. That's why we try to flatten things when it's appropriate. And then finally, before I request that you talk about the Mozilla hubs, I have a question of, if I now get Jacob to export as HTML, should he allow that export also to go to a server? Would that be useful? I'm thinking about what Fabienne showed earlier, because considering we have export to WordPress, which broke because of WordPress changed something, that we have that technology, would that be a useful thing for testing? So we could easily get it into the headset, or is that not how it works?
I mean, it's a plausible route. It's just a matter of, you know, I mean, you could drop stuff in Pastebin. You know, it's not particularly opinionated in terms of how you obtain it. It's just, where is the data, and is it in a recognizable and replicable kind of representation that you know what you're doing with. So I mean, yes, but that kind of functionality needs to be paired with an expected kind of endpoint, of which I don't know if we have a particular line of sight to. So
okay. Wait, you can't use Discord because you have a landline, but you have an internet connection, Peter.
Yeah, but there's security. So I went through a whole nightmare trying to interact with their support people, and they believe that landlines are somehow being used by computer fraud folks, and they refuse to allow anyone to verify an account using a landline. So anyone whose primary phone is a physical phone can't get a Discord account.
Oh, it has to be, you have to have a smartphone.
Yeah, it has to be a smartphone only.
Right.
So eventually I'll get one, but until I have one, I'm locked out of Discord. And they were very frustrating because they went back and forth with their tech support people. They
I remember you mentioning this like a couple months ago.
Yeah, it's incredibly frustrating. And their tech support people are just absolutely beastly. And as far as they're concerned, it's policy. There's nothing they can do. It's like they have no control over their own policies, and they couldn't care less that older people particularly tend to still use landlines and don't have smartphones. And they don't care that there's a whole generation of older users who they're locking out of their system because of that policy. And they don't care about any rational argument that people do not change landline numbers willy-nilly. It's not like a burner phone that you're buying and throwing away and you have 16 of them. They have no evidence even that there actually is any fraud taking place on their system, but they're just absolutely adamant. Everything's out of my control. It's policy. I'll escalate the issue. And then it comes right back to, there's nothing we can do about our own policies. And I just was tearing my hair. I absolutely despise that company. They have total contempt for anyone who doesn't totally conform to their model of how you should be using technology.
Well, it's very much in line with. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, a big
What were you saying,
disconnect.
Brando? What were you saying, Brando?
I was just gonna. I was. Well, Raphael was gonna talk. Yeah.
I was just going to comment that there's a big disconnect between new tech companies and that only want to sell services to the new generation. So like Peter was saying, sometimes they forget that there is a whole generation. You know, it's multiple age groups that use products.
Yeah, and for better or worse, Discord understands its target audience to be people who are agglomerating together for the purposes of sharing their enthusiasm for video games for the most part. So it skews substantially younger even than the youngest person we've ever seen in here, in terms of its target demographic. And for them, they don't even necessarily have access to a landline, let alone sort of substantial kind of reliance on it. For my part, I haven't had a landline since 2006. So yeah, it really is to do with
it's like, hey guys, if it's really and I was saying to them, hey guys, if it's really a security issue, then I could send you a notarized letter with the photocopy of my driver's license to prove to you that I'm me, and that should satisfy any possible security. No, they won't hear anything of it. On an unrelated note, I pasted in a link to a graphic from a Kai Gornbach paper showing a PSpec editor. I've been working on my user interface framework, and I've noticed that now I have 20 permutations of just selection tabs alone. So I'm starting to think that maybe I need to abstract over all these permutations. Maybe I should have like a p-spec abstraction to describe sets of all the different parameters, so I could just set them with one name instead of having to set all of the subcomponents of each dimension of the visualization separately.
Yeah, we'll get to that, Peter. I think Fabian has some points to what was recently said, but just really briefly on your issue with Discord and so on. In Norway, if you want to access anything, it has to be through a smartphone. That is basically what's considered your ID. So once you have a secure phone, I can do my bank things instantly. If I can't do it, it's an absolute pain. So it's coming more and more, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I'm afraid they might be dragging me into the future. I'm just going to have to bite the bullet and get a smartphone.
Trent? Yes. Be careful with lead poisoning. Right. Fabian, please.
I'll just to quickly touch on the Discord and the smartphone part. It's a bit, honestly, I don't like it. I think having a smartphone, if you wanted to, and if you have an optional way to log in, it's great. But to make it mandatory is bad. Especially we have similar cases in Belgium where to log in as a two-step authentication, one of the entity providing that is a commercial entity linked to banks, and that for sure are going to gather personal data in order to resell it. So yeah, doing it through other technology, yes, hijacking and making it mandatory, terrible. Now to go back on the point that Mark made about the lack of a good screenshot, or I think also what you mentioned about having an animation rather than a fixed frame. I think that's pretty deep, and it's the same problem we have about capturing or how to get a trace of our meetings. Is how can we keep on having some continuity to build over time? So I'll put two solutions, imperfect ones, in the chat. The first one is called Screen Copy, which does exactly what you imagine it would do, which is it takes the video stream from your headset, and then you can do whatever you want with it, including recording it. As far as I know, it doesn't take much either bandwidth or power. It's obviously not what you would do with your, let's say, on a plane and you want to optimize for battery time. But if you're at home, it often works over Wi-Fi. So you don't, I don't think you have also the red blinking or anything like this. So that could be a way that you just record the whole session, and then you can extract either GIFs or a small moment or screenshot. So that works relatively well. That's also how I do a lot of the work, that I'm going to mirror the content of the device on my desktop, and I can also move without even looking through. It's limited, but that works quite well. And the second solution is closer to what Brendel showed a couple of weeks ago, which is about replayability or history or even a timeline, which is a A-frame motion capture components, where basically instead of recording the visual, you record the position of the hands and the headset. And then assuming you have a stable enough environment that allow for replayability, let's say interactions that would replay when the hands go through, you get that. The problem is you need a stable enough environment or to fork it with every modification, which can be a bit costly. And also you don't have sound or video, it's just the position of the tracker. So if you were to, let's say, be in Noda and say, oh, that's an interesting thing because of XYZ, you're going to lose that part. So those are two partial imperfect solutions. But I think honestly, it's a pretty deep problem. The same way of using a file system to bring content in. Like the value of VR to me is not the time I spend in the headset, but if when I remove the headset and I'm a better citizen, a better researcher, a poet, whatever. So when I learn something and do some discovery through it, so that means being able to capture the moment. So yeah, those are paths or ways to tinker with that could be useful.
Yeah, thanks.
The last point from Fabian, I think it could be really interesting for a demo to do when you do the demonstration, you do kind of a time lapse of our work over, let's say, 3 months. The last 3 months, where we build kind of an information space, a mural, we add chat logs, we add ideas, discussion, links, and we'll build up. And we do it in both with objects appearing, but also maybe a kind of at a finer grained level where you actually move things around. You see a VR headset, small replayed things that work with information potentially. And then you play it all the way until now, and 2 people step in, one on a laptop and one in a VR headset, and demonstrating everything or adding new pieces to that. So it's a live object all the time, or it's a real object in a programming sense. It's not just a video, but it's a replay inside the system, and perhaps even the spectators of the demo. If let's say we have 10 or 15 people, they could step in and watch it from their points, but after the demo they could play around with the whole demo and move things around the right. So it would be a different kind of a demo. It would be something you could join from a headset or from a browser, at least be a spectator, but maybe even a participant. I think that would be a very powerful experience. Of course, it can be a video of the whole thing. We could record the thing and post it on YouTube, but actually having the demonstration done in something live. That was one thing. And the other thing is I really want to highlight the thing Brandon did with the kind of streaming things to the headset through bouncing it on a web server, maybe from so you have so you stream objects to the headset to solve many of the login questions and maybe data security questions and data ownership questions that you kind of log in once maybe with your headset to your personal page on a server, on a trusted server or a service somewhere, and you could put objects from your laptop. You log in with your laptop on the same server and drop objects there, and they get streamed over to the headset, but the actual real document or the canonical copy exists on your laptop in the end, or your personal system. And then you can save it down to your file system. I think that's a very powerful way of working with documents, at least. It's not as multiplayer. Well, it could be multiplayer as well, but it's. I thought of it as single player but multi-device. So you work on your computer, put on your headset, work for a while, and then it's saved back at your local computer. It's a very powerful thing. Over.
Yeah, that's a really nice way of looking at it. I think we need a term for that, like hybrid or something, hybrid VR flat.
Well, that is also sort of the idea of a personal cloud or personal area network. That idea that you have multiple devices, endpoints that you're kind of interfacing with simultaneously. So, the fact is that many of us have phones and laptops, and sometimes desktops, and sometimes tablets, and sometimes headsets, making sure that they all interact with each other and that you can get all of the relevant data out of each of them at the right moment is incredibly powerful. So, having a web system as a connective tissue between those is really, really valuable. I haven't managed to get a WebSocket to the web browser on my Apple Watch yet, but rest assured that's coming.
Yet. Yes, darling. So, Egga, we're still in a meeting. Come and say hi real quick. Egga has the best idea for play, so we'll play afterwards. Okay, you can stay here for a bit. Right, so a couple of things. Number one is, with what you were describing earlier, Fabian, can we relatively easily record our VR meetings now?
So from single person perspective, let's say, it's not, you wouldn't be able to fly through the scene after, for example.
Okay, so we
the
could have
second
one
thing you
secretary,
could,
so to speak.
sorry?
So we could have one camera person or secretary or something like that, right?
Yes.
Okay, well, that's very good.
Or even several. We could place a different. We could do different recordings from different vantage points if we really want, and then cut it together later on. But we need to have camera persons, so to say, log in from a computer or system to do that.
You can also do it with both.
As camera people, right? Because then we get static points of view, which may be more useful than our heads bobbing up and down a lot. Or no? Okay, so that was one. Brandel, the amazement that you sent, I tried to drag a liquid file onto there, but I couldn't get it on the Quest. Obviously, there is a huge thing between the Mac and the Quest. Is that something that kind of, how do you sneak it to work now? Or could I maybe somehow put the document onto an iCloud or a Dropbox, or is that a different thing?
It should work. I mean, it doesn't work with Safari. If you're using Chrome.
Okay, well, that explains it.
That could have been it. Yeah, for some reason, Safari doesn't give you access to the contents of a package app, so you'd need to rename it to a .zip in order to get it out.
Okay.
I didn't try in Chrome. I haven't pressed particularly hard on the Safari story because it's my feeling, and I really need to tell them about it, that their behavior in the browser is wrong.
All right.
Actually meeting with one of them today, so I'll talk to her about it. So it should work. That's a page with a server on it, so you kind of need to be in the, and right now it's just casting to I don't know if you saw this, Raphael, but I have a web page at varioussneakypaste.glitch that allows you to have a multi-user login or multi-user session involving WebXR, such that you can drag an author file into a page, and it will create on all connected clients the view of that, such that you can navigate it in 2D on your in your 3D screen, in monoscopic 3D on a desktop computer, or actually in VR on Oculus Quest. So you also need to have your Quest like on that page before you drag it in on your computer. But if you do that, then it should work. But yeah, like those, given that kind of functionality, that's just the dumbest way for the system to be able to work. It would be possible to have it cache those things and store them, and then distribute them to any participants after the fact, such that you'd be able to kind of just log into it afterward. Those are all, we were talking about somewhat, frustratedly about Discord. Like the reality of it is something that I think Ted Nelson put really well in Computer Science Index, is that none of this is technology. It's all the qualitative choices that people have made about what their kind of job and goal is, and coordinating that off and saying everything outside of that is not my job. And so from the perspective of building an application, we have the ability to decide what it is that it's for, and building functionality around it. But absent a particularly clear kind of goal, it is pretty easy to make these things as sort of messy and free form as that. And this is a pretty fertile basis for experimentation, is using a glitch server to be able to multicast events to a Quest that you can kind of drive from the currently unfortunately more expressive environment of a desktop computer that you're able to sort of drag and drop files from and things like that. So yeah. In terms of the sorry.
No, please.
Oh, I realized I was going to launch into more discussion of Mark's demo, but other people have hands up, so I'll defer.
Yeah, just before I put my hand down, one of the main reasons I'm so super excited about us actually being in the space is this thing that I know it's a bit obvious, but there's a huge difference between dealing with a published work and a manuscript. And I think that's something it's worth reminding ourselves, because what Mark has is published work. So it's polling, looking, reading, putting back kind of thing. And when we are trying to build something together, it's a very different workflow. And none of us has a stadium-sized room where we can just go into VR and run around all over the place. So we're all physically space constrained in physical real space. So once we can have frames or whatever we're going to call it, where if someone puts in a map or a timeline or whatever, it has a space to go to, I think we're going to learn a lot over. By the way, I put the link in there to the VR thing. And when I'm listening now, I'm going to see if it shows up on my headset. So hand down and over to Pete.
Okay. I was thinking that since it seemed to be problematic to use the clipboard to move things in and out, we could get a lot of mileage out of Jeff Raskin, humane interface style identifiers, something like the cheerful drunken peacock that you could remember and type in, and you wouldn't need to use a computer mediated clipboard to get it. It would just stick in your head. You could even remember it a week later if you met somebody on the subway and say, my demo is at the cheerful drunken peacock, and they could type in and remember that off the top of their head, cheerful drunken peacock, type it into their headset, and then let the network negotiate and find the actual file and bring it into Quest just based on that identifier. So we can actually avoid depending on the computer for the full transfer of those identifiers if we pick identifiers that are human brain friendly. As far as being able to play back the meetings and be able to navigate around the room, I wonder if it would be possible to save out a simplified curve-fitted version of the control signals that everyone's generating. So instead of having all of the data points as you're sweeping your head, you could just have the system recognize the series of data points, do a curve fitting to them, and figure out that, what he really did was swept his head through 35 degrees of arc motion, and in a compact form, just record, Brando, head, 35-degree arc, right, Frode, pitch forward, 16 degrees, the time mark, whatever, and just store that. And then the computer could regenerate the full control signal, and then it could re-render what the VR environment would have looked like based on that control signal after the fact. And that would let us walk around the room and actually see it from different perspectives.
Yeah. I mean that's the goal. That's motion capture. What you're describing is motion capture, and we do it all the time. We have sort of 5. We encode the XYZ position of 20 something points. Not in this, but in commercial motion capture, which we've done for video games and training in the past. Not where at my current company, but back in New Zealand, back in the early noughts. It's wonderful. It means that you have so much flexibility, and it's a mainstay of what people do for video games because the sort of the expectations for how to construct and reconstruct performances in order to make them kind of interesting for people to be able to watch. So all of those things are manifestly possible to tap into. Again, once you have a sense of what it is that what you're doing is what is for, you'd be distressed by how much data you can make and get away with it. And so the multi-point stuff, like I did a thing, I'm not sure if you saw the slow mirror thing, Peter, but you can record minutes of hand posed data and then save it just as a straight up GLTF file, which is the 3D model that you use for being able to kind of record walk cycles of like little soldiers and 3D models. So yeah, it's possible. It's easier than you would think, and it's fun to play with if you can only come up with the right context in which to do it and for what purpose.
And back to Fabienne.
So I don't think it's actually so easy in the sense that we have a lot of information actually going on that, for example, if we are in a VR environment that is very minimalistic, let's say Noda, where you have a couple of nodes and they might change, and we record the hand position, that's okay. But if we were, let's say, half dozen of us in Mozilla Hubs, we also have the voice, and the voice is positional. And also maybe one of us is going to bring up a video or share the screen. So we also need to record the screen sharing moment. And that room need to be stable enough. Again, that, for example, nobody modifies something so that the next day, if we replay the position of everything, it's broken. So it's not necessarily extremely complex, but it's a bit of, well, I haven't seen, let me put it another way, I haven't seen it yet. I think it would definitely be useful, but if you take into account like a rich experience, not just the hands moving, so far, let's say if we do a trip together, let's say in Hubs, and we show up a document, even a PDF, then yeah, it's not trivial to be able to replay it. It's valuable, but to have the, let's say, complete experience again, so far I haven't seen it.
Right. Yeah. The challenge of building a complete sort of application is still not trivial. I'm just, in terms of the connective sort of techniques and capabilities to build one is what I'm saying is achievable. Yeah, building an app is always hard in large part because you have to capture a complete use case of what it is that somebody wants to do with it.
You know what? You can keep talking, but I have to show you this.
Excellent.
Just incredible. So using Chrome, loaded this URL that's in our chat. Anybody can do it now. Just click on it. And then I take my thesis, boom, boom. And by the time I put my headset on, it's already there. Interaction in 2D, awful. Interaction with VR headset, not awful. Obviously, there's some scaling issues and so on, but it works.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, just amazing. So the next step is for us to be in a space where it's over there or over here, and we have that thing to it. Kind of amazing.
Can I comment a little bit more? I've been trying to break my resistance of VR, trying to understand it better. So when I see what Frode just showed, so for example, in VR, it would be as if I have this book in front of me and I'm kind of panning and zooming the book in front of me. And that's not really how we interact with things. I mean, of course, it is how we interact with things, like holding things in one hand and then using the other hand for something else. But in VR, it's like things are just floating, right?
Not really, not really. Not really. It is like we have first experienced with Brandel's and then Adam's mural. It usually moves on one plane, which is really useful. And then the magic is when you move your head a little bit, it's not usually just a floating thing, but this is clearly one of the key issues we need to develop together.
Yeah. So I would say though, I actually agree that in terms of a book metaphor, that's where virtual reality is currently weakest. Because as I've said, the divergence accommodation conflict and the focal and the ideal focal distance is such that it's not really good for things inside arm's length. But where it is good and where it's better is for reproduction of things like Bob Horn's information murals, where you have something that's a large, implicitly spatial thing that you want to be able to kind of navigate, and you get something from that sort of larger spatial context that you find yourself in or at, here or here or here. but books, I absolutely agree, are not wonderful.
So I was going to get to kind of like the infographic area, because I think that's where I see a lot of applications for it, which I think is great. But instead of always being 100% immersed in everything all at once, I feel like things should pop out. So when you pop something out from VR, you go into like a flat area for you to consume the content, and then you pop out into the exploration area, and then you pop into something to read something to get that experience, and then you pop out into the exploration area to go somewhere else. But it's not navigating in free space 100% of the time. I feel that's extremely confusing, and it's more of a burden than helpful. So I think we should think of different environments for different activities. One for navigating, one for consuming, one for maybe getting in depth into a content, and one for finding more of that content or different areas that is connected to that content. So instead of trying to have everything in one single environment, try to think of 2 or 3 different environments that you transition between them to get what you need to get, or do what you need to do.
You have to just get in there again, Raphael, because it is so different. And I'm going to leave actually the most newcomer here, Mark, to comment, so I don't just go on a half an hour little thing about this.
No, I definitely can attest actually that I was genuinely surprised in using it. There are all sorts of new things, and the difficult thing is there are things that are limitations of the state of the art that are not true limitations to the medium, and you have to sort of look beyond that. So some of this thing about focal distance and things is where we are now, and isn't necessarily where we're going to be in a fairly short time as things ramp up. So that's kind of hard, because of course you sort of see the restrictions out, you think, and your immediate reaction is, right, is that as good as it gets? Well, no, it is now, but it won't be later. But it's like, I was just thinking, you'll know this one, Raphael. I was thinking when you say, "Oh, it's doing manga." Well, imagine what you might do with some, graphic novels, comics, call them what you will, and even just the ability to move things. And the other thing to bear in mind with a book, one of the aspects of things you can begin to do with a virtual, it's not so much a 3D. The virtual environment is that you, for instance, could follow a different trail through a book that you can't do with a printed book. Well, you could, effectively, well, here's a metaphor to tie them together. Imagine a choose your own adventure book, which sort of did that within the flat domain of a printed book. But so these things sort of come alive. But yeah, so yes, I can totally say that I'm pleasantly surprised, and I'm just excited by it, and now have lots of new things that I now know that I don't understand and have to learn all about. But that's kind of nice, every day is school day. Reason I stepped my hand up is a slight tangent, just because Fred, who stepped away. So maybe I'll ask him when he's come back. So because Fabienne, do you want to go ahead?
Just a final comment, Mark, on that. You mentioned something on that's where technology is today and where we're going, and I think that has been the topic of, not the topic of discussion, but that's what people have been saying since the 1990s on VR. Look at VR right now. You can see this, you can see that. Imagine where it's going to be in 10 years from now. And it's been 30 years, and it still seems very rudimentary.
Okay, I see Fabian has his hand up, and so does Mark, but just really briefly. I bought the optical inserts so that when I wear my headsets, I don't need to wear my glasses. But it's still a little fuzzy. It's not super nice. If I'm going to look at a picture or really read something, I'm going to go to my Retina MacBook. There's no question. But the shock for me of being in VR now is 2 things. One, the sense of presence. Instantly you're there. It's just absolutely shocking. The second thing is how incredibly stable things are. You move your head and wobble, the world is rock solid. So therefore, and more as I'm writing our document, I'm trying to say that currently at least, VR is to see large volumes of information and relationships. And the discussion we've had here, I'm so glad to hear so many people say it. It is important to be able to use all the different devices. I don't think anyone here is saying that within the next 10 years, we will only work in VR. Of course not.
Oh, no, definitely not.
But there is so much more we can do. And that's why it's so exciting to go through these things. Anyway, I know that Brazil economy has tanked as European economy is about to tank, but we'll have to figure out how to get you a headset, and you too, Peter. And then we'll still have the same discussion, but from a different angle. And Mark, I think.
I was going to say another thing for Raphael, and another thing and again, it's the unexpected things. So pass through, which isn't, you could say, well, isn't it just sort of AR? Well, it's not really doing that. The idea is if you stick your head outside, because I've got fairly constrained space down to my desk where I'm doing most of my tests, but you know, I can basically lean out of one reality into another, pick up my cup of coffee, have a drink, and basically lean back into a different world.
Yes.
And I really admit, that just makes me smile every time. I mean, how insane is that? Because, you know, when you're inside, however, you know, whatever limitations there are or aren't within that, it's just this amazing thing of stepping between this. And there is a very real sense of being inside the virtual space, no doubt of that.
Mark, no, I've always agreed with all of you regarding that aspect. And I have always been, you know, delighted and surprised and happy when I stepped into VR. It was always a nice experience, right? But it's just, you know, trying to take a step back and analyze, you know, how long will these things take time, right? And I always like to look at timelines because they give you a better glimpse of how technology changes, how the world changes.
Sure.
So I'm looking at a timeline for VR, you know, and it's been around for a while. It's not something that, well, next year, you know, we're going to have this huge boom. It might be next year because it's already been 30 years, you know.
But the useful thing at this point is, and one thing you're well placed to do with, in the sense, the collective people in the room is the opportunity to say that one thing we sort of raised a couple of times is you can look at this and listen to, oh, there seems to be not a lot of technology going on here. Well, yes, because at this stage, everything is not simple. But one of the things that, I go back to, you know, the early days of sort of, you know, Ted's work and Andy Van Dam's work. What did they use the first hypertext system for? Teaching a philosophy course. Well, hurrah! You know, it wasn't done for coding, it wasn't done for programming. So the more things we ask early on of saying, well, let's not just be driven where the sort of the things we're just doing to make things happen take us. And it's not because anyone's lack of imagination. All this stuff's hard. It's a slow jog. And so, but I think it's really useful to put all these provocations in to say, well, why aren't we doing this? Because sometimes I think what I've learned with some of the tools I've worked with over time is the great thing about not understanding how things work is some things you thought were really difficult are really hard. So some things you thought were difficult are easy, and vice versa. So it never hurts to raise the question, because sometimes, you know, we get a little breakthrough because no one thought of that. So it's not as if I would want anyone to feel that you can't get in, you know, that it's not quite ready to jump into yet, because I think there's lots to do. God, now, well, when Fred's not on his headset. Very quick one for you, Fred. You may or may not know the answer, because very quick. So Fabian's patiently waiting. Is with Liquid, if I just put a concept map JSON file in, rather as Brandon was doing the other day, is there anything else I need to change in the file to make it work in Author? The reason I ask is I can see a way for me to do a quick test for Peter. It's a side thing to do at Tinderbox.
Oh, Tinderbox to Author? Yeah.
That'd be kind of cool to move some Tinderbox spatial hypertext maps across. I mean, obviously there's a limit. There are different affordances in each, but obviously we can take the intersect of the two and might be able to do some fun stuff with it. Anyway, I should stop because Fabian's waiting.
So I'll go back a bit on Raphael's point about, let's say, being sequential or maybe not. Just to share that one of my motivation also for tinkering with VR came before VR existed, because I would argue that VR 20 years ago is not like VR today. Like, it's radically different just by the fact that I don't care if I drop this, it fits in my backpack, and it just works without like a 10-hour setup from technicians that are going to put cameras in the room. So I think it's qualitatively really different. But what motivated me, what was it, like 10 or 15 years ago, to learn a bit more about cognitive science was a paper on the kitchen and how you basically organize the tools based on the recipe. So if the goal of the recipe, let's say, is to make a cake, and then you're going to put the bowl in front of, let's say, the part where you're going to mold a bit the dough and put the water in, etc. So there is a disposition in space for the different tool part of a global task. And I think that's the interesting part, let's say, of taking VR seriously, that now you get a space again to do this. And if you take the desktop metaphor, because it is just that metaphor, we don't actually have a desktop in our computer, but we're familiar with our desktop, like just in front of me, I have that. And then I actually did put in a specific position, paper and other. And I think that begs us a bit, let's say, the different exploration with a file system, or the example of the URL I posted, where instead of doing a drag and drop of the liquid file to a viewer, it would be a parameter in the URL. You can have either of these, meaning you go from, let's say, the file system to a viewer, and from the viewer to an editor, or you can also have the different tools in a virtual space in front of you, which can bring a lot of value, because if you're purely sequential, it's going to work, of course, but then you don't necessarily step back. Like, what is the tool, that task at hand, or can actually combine 2 or 3 of the different tools in a chain? So I don't have an answer to this, but I think it's interesting at least to explore both.
Yeah, the whole chain thing is an issue, because obviously when something is in a virtual environment, whoever designed that environment determines what interactions you can do, as you know, I've talked about a lot. But also, even something as simple as what Brandel, and not simple in what you made, but what you allow us to do, you know, to take the map from Author into VR, it means I have a wall instead of a 13-inch screen. And that in itself is really, really absolutely magic, because you know, you go in and out and all of that stuff. But the thing that I'm so eager for us to do, and that's why Mozilla Hubs might be interesting, is exactly that you're talking about, having a wall. It is, where are we going to put these things, right? If once we have many things and we have a chain of work, because like Adam and I were arguing about something a few weeks ago. It doesn't matter what, but it's a kind of a thing where he puts a point, I put a point, they're connected, right? To make that happen right now is just not possible, right? But the fact that we are learning how to use immersed, which is very primitive in this context, the fact that we're playing with murals, which are also primitive in a way, you know, but then finding out how it fits together is just absolutely amazing.
I wrote
gently curved around the view. Oh, sorry, Peter. In most of the ones we have a virtual screen in, you can actually choose that. You can, you know, make them move as you see fit. But that that's if you're looking at one thing from one specific position, it's like you're watching a TV. But once you're in a room where, like Adam and I jumped around one room, you have something over there, you have something over there, it becomes a different kind of viewing experience. And that's why we need to dive in. Sorry, Fabian.
So I was going to
Raphael, yeah.
Yeah, talking about what Fabian mentioned on the kitchen. I don't know if it's exactly this. I haven't read the paper yet, but it's also in French. The idea of mise en place, which is every tool in its place. It's a concept where you organize, you know, the kitchen for the production of food. It's especially related to restaurants. Restaurants, if they don't have this, they cannot serve hundreds or thousands of people, right? And that's why I think in the professions of of the world, one of the most ancient ones is cooking, is preparing food, and that's the one that is the most optimized, organized, structured. It's not really going to change that much, like the main structure. And I think it's one of the ones that we can learn the most from, in categorization, in process, in all sorts of ways. It's a simple structure, but it gives a lot of freedom for new constructions as well. So I always like to study things related to cooking and to kitchen organization and restaurants and all of those areas, because I feel like the skills you learn from that can be transposed to any other profession. So I really, when you mentioned this paper, I'm very interested to read it. And it reminded me of this concept of mise en place and how we can apply it to different areas. So when you're talking about, the table and having things organized, I already know that I always put my writing instruments on my left side. I put, my other instruments on my right side. So having a structure is very important, but people have to know that and have to know.
I have lost Raphael's feed.
No, he's just being mise en place. He's just being frozen in place.
Yeah. Who'd have thought cooking in 3D?
Actually, that was the first thing that I did motion capture for. Was it was a food safety training system. It wasn't for VR, but we did motion capture for it, so we were very much in the space of doing it, and so it would have been amenable to being put into VR. But yeah, my oh, we got Raphael back. We lost you for a second.
Still a work meeting. I know it's really
And
boring.
maybe still don't have you. I've always said wood shop and kitchens are the two sort of most encoded spaces that we have right now, and they should be our primary points of reference for how to encode information work, as well as pre-digital information work, because presumably people had, and Ted Nelson has talked about the paste pot table and things like that. Sorry, Raphael, I wasn't talking over as much as talking instead of.
No, that's fine. I was just waiting for my connection to stabilize.
Yeah, we're agreeing that it's really important to be like that. I don't do much gaming in VR, even though it's a bit stressful on Twitter. Every time VR is mentioned, it's regarding some sort of a game. But there is this Zenith or something that I've tried. I haven't been able to get past the main lobby. But the thing is, you have two swords. Well, after a while, you have two swords. But the way, you click the grab when your hands are down and they come up, and the motion capture is absolutely phenomenal. But the key is that they kind of snap. So you don't have a thing in front of you, but you have it on your body. But it's so easy to just get that and do what you need to do and put it back. So the in place you're talking about, it's interesting. That can be in the environment around you, in front of you, on a table, on your body, all these different places. It's really interesting. There's a military game, can't remember what it's called, very impressive. But there, if you don't put your gun back in the holster exactly the right way, it drops on the floor, which I guess is very immersive in one sense, but it's also very stupid if you just want to be effective in that environment.
Unless it's supposed to be realistic, you really don't want to drop a loaded weapon on your foot.
Yeah, especially these days. Adam?
As an opposite thing, I wonder how much of knowledge work that is more like dance than cooking, where you leave no traces. It's you identify with the knowledge objects, and as I wrote, the meal is in your head. So it's a more experiential experience. That was, and not so much about. Of course, when you write something or you create something, but sometimes it's just putting two things beside each other and reflect on them, and that is not so tool based, but more, that is something else. And also the dance part, where you move with the objects, in the objects, and you become the objects. I think that is another metaphor that is really worth exploring for knowledge work.
Just going to be really rude and interject really briefly before Rafael and Fabian. The Ms. N Plus idea in VR also includes your body. So I think that is completely true what you're saying, Adam. To have things well captured, you know, because you can't do things if you can't see your arms, so to speak, right? So I think just the idea is that having a mental model whether it's static, semi-static, or very liquid, so to speak, is depending on the different situation. But even a dancer has to have a floor. There has to be something to hold on to. So I think the discussion of what the floor is as a metaphor can come into lots of different areas.
The last thing I was going to say, because before I got disconnected, is related to opportunities and challenges into going into a new space. And one of those challenges is skeuomorphism, where we can't keep using the analogy of desktop for something that is completely different and has a lot more possibilities. Otherwise, that just hinders people's understanding of that new space. So if we keep calling desktop as a desktop, then people won't know that there's, for example, smart folders, dynamic trails, all of these contents that can change and mutate based on the new environment, where things are not fixed and positioned forever. So that's a big challenge and a big opportunity as well, to kind of try to redefine concepts that are going to be used in the new space. But where do we draw the boundaries? Because it's easier to explain something based on what people already know, but that hinders future understanding. I don't have an answer to that.
Okay, Fabian, over to you. But Rafael, we got to get your headset, man.
For the last specific part, one thing I remembered, there was a good balance between both. I forgot if it was in a game or in a tool, but you had the metaphor of the desktop, you're in VR, but then you have an infinite, not tray, but place where you can put stuff, and then you pull, but it's not just like a meter like your desk is in terms of depth, but it's like 10 meters or 50 meters. So I think that could be a good way where you onboard people with things they know, but then you very quickly make them understand that, no, you can actually leverage the medium completely differently. So that's just one example, but it struck me as a way to make people comfortable and letting them know that, okay, now it's time to appreciate the medium differently.
That's why I think introduction to things is the most important aspect of everything. How you introduce things to people is like the most important thing.
And the other part on Adam and basically how far can we have a metaphor of a physical process, let's say like cooking, applied to knowledge. I honestly don't know if thinking happens in my head. I'm not just being provocative. I actually don't know. Like, I rely so much on tools. I think I'm a complete idiot without tools. Like, if I don't have books to get new ideas or a discussion like this, or on my pieces of paper to write on, I think I'm completely useless. So I don't know how much I can get new ideas or process anything without tool. So I think it's probably, I would argue it's possible to go quite far with a tangible way to relate to information or knowledge, because it's like the metaphor of the naked ape, or we're like the worst animal compared to any skills, but I think we're also the worst even in terms of thinking if we remove all this environment that looks transparent to us because we use it on a daily basis, and yet is fundamental to the way we are.
Right. So as you know, I'm lucky enough to host a family from Ukraine here, and there's 6 of them. So it's a bit impractical. But the reason I'm mentioning this in the whole pile, first of all, I feel a lot less stressed now that they're here than before, because selfishly, I have a feeling that I'm actually able to do something, right? Which is really bizarre. But also, the one time I have had tears over the weekend was not watching the horrors of Ukraine. That's just mind-numbing. But it was actually when we were on the tube back the day before we got COVID. And, you know, Edgar's 4.5. There was this Asian American, Asian British, whatever, mixed family, immediately wanted to give him the seats, the mother and the child and the father. No, he doesn't need a seat. And they left. And then someone else came in, took the seats. And then a family came in with a baby. And the guys who sat down immediately got up to give their seats. Right? When you talk about immediacy, you know, with human beings, random people who know nothing about each other, constantly getting up on the underground to give seats. When I was younger and doing the tube every day, I would never sit down because there would always be this annoying old lady or whoever come in, and I knew I'd have to stand up. You know, it is such deep-rooted, beautiful human behavior. And then we allow our species to do the shit we're doing in Europe. So when you're talking about immediacy, of course, VR isn't real human connection, but there is a different kind of immediacy with your work. And you get, and it's funny, Raphael, because I know I'm preaching to the choir, even though you brought up these kinds of things, that you employ so much of who you are. And this is when Brandel pulled the wool away from my face, was, you know, the fact that you can move your head and the things you're dealing with are different. It's just so powerful. So I really hope that we can build basic steps, as we already are. Well, not me, but you guys, and also ask these big questions. I'm just grateful for these questioning of what the medium is, and not just doing a simple thing. Presence matter to be present, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would say just because things aren't, rather than the interactions being not real, what I would say is that they're not direct, they're intermediated. But interactions with people are every bit as real as long as they're sort of faithfully reproduced, or that as long as what you think you're doing is what is happening to the other person, for better and worse. You know, and one of the motivations for a slow mirror was to make sure that people can actually see what it's like being on the receiving end of interactions like that. Because if you haven't actually had it happen, then you don't know what it's like. And so, in terms of virtual harassment, that's actually pivotal. Anybody working on a platform that is supposed to manage or consider virtual harassment absolutely must be the recipient of it in order to understand the sort of psychic impact of it. Because it's not just that it's happening, it's also that it's happening to you, and that it's happening at the hands of a person with agency. The same as anytime my young daughter would experience cruelty, even secondhand, seeing cruelty happen, she'd have nightmares that night. That was when she was 3 years old. She's sort of more inured to it now, but it was striking because it was not actually about the reality of it at any point. She could get really badly damaged by an accident and shrug it off. But if she was the recipient of even a mild slight that was specifically intended, then it would cause her vastly more distress at a time when she didn't have the language to process it. So, yeah. So it's very real, and it's very very interesting to have the opportunity to kind of introspect it. But yeah, like Fabian was saying about the environment in which one thinks. I think that we have the ability to build spaces that are entirely for that thought. I definitely agree, Raphael, that books are better, but the thing is that a book, the utility of a book, the sort of the spatial threshold of the utility of the book is that it's very useful here, and then not at all useful here. It works really, really well here, and then it fails to work at all outside here. And one of the things that I've started to recognize from being in VR, or not necessarily recognize but feel, is just the way in which it's so strange and arbitrary that we have such phenomenal high fidelity pixel displays here, and then nothing at all here. and what I'm really excited about is being able to kind of explore, if not you know, a complete continuity of it through an HMD, then at least sort of maybe a vignette of capability. And that's why I don't know if you saw or if I showed, you know, the projector that I have is very exciting to be able to have that idea of a more immersive sort of set of display environments. It doesn't have to be mediated by a head-mounted display, but that can think more, allows one to think more holistically about what the computing space is. You know, so Apple released that Mac Studio last week, and I've been really excited about that for the scale of pixel displays. They say that you can drive 90 million pixels with it. And by most accounts, if you have 90 million pixels that you can display with, then you can display at a range of different sizes and a range of different directions, positions, and not miss any of them. You know, so if you have, you can devote 14 megapixels to your central vision, but then you still have 60 million pixels left to be able to put around your room. And I think that that's very exciting. And that's not virtual reality, but that is immersive computing. And as such, best prototyped through virtual reality at this point until people get their act together and start printing Gibboard with displays on it, or projector cameras, and or whatever else is necessary to sort of facilitate it.
I think you're going to be disappointed because I thought about it yesterday or 2 days ago on a discussion about personalized knowledge management for research. That I think, I don't know if most of us have done that, but at some point you print like a dozen or so papers and then you toss them on the floor around you. And then you start to think, look for links, or which one to read first, or which one reference one another. And I think there is, and I don't want to sound sentimental, but there is a feeling of it by being able to manipulate them. And I'm afraid that when you get just, let's say, the quality of the display, even though immersive and though really high density, but without some way, controllers or hand tracking or laser or some way, some rich way to push back on that display, I think it's, I would argue, I don't know, I haven't done the test, but I bet it's better to have a lower resolution display, but with an active feedback loop than a high resolution display where you can just watch.
Yeah. Although I will interrupt here, Mark. One of the things that I've been really excited about recently is realizing that if you are absolving a fiducial object of the responsibility for its visual display, then it's able to focus its entire job on being a tactile one. So, for example, if you want to have a system of mechanoceptors or mechanically active surfaces, maybe through pneumatics, then you can create an iPad-sized device that doesn't do any display in and of itself, but is just responsible for raising and lowering surfaces, such that if you know where it is, then you can do the display part of it with an HMD, and so that you have tactile systems that you're able to kind of manipulate and then intervene on that have the ability to get the visual channel kind of portrayed sort of separately. So I think there are a lot of really interesting things. I definitely agree. There's people talk about uncanny valley in the context of robotics, where they say if it's real enough, and it's sort of been carried over to cartooning and stuff. If it's real enough, then you start to hold it to a higher standard, which means that it's challenging to understand. It becomes weird and gross. I think that also applies for sensory stimulus, and so the better stuff gets, the worse we'll miss tactile feedback and things. So there's a long program of work, but I think that there are ways of making good on it.
Well, if I step away from my normally slightly glass half empty approach on things, I actually have a positive sort of reaction to what Fabian was saying to bridge back, and that's through this odd thing of the time I've used the tool Tinderbox over the years, which partly I came to because I've got very crabbed left-handed writing, and I'm an appalling touch. Well, I'm not a touch typist. In other words, most of my devices can't keep up with this. And so, you know, I mean, in a sense, I work more in abstract, just as a way of trying to keep ahead of things. But so one of the things that I like in the tool there was this idea of these open maps. So, I mean, someone said, isn't it like a mind map? I said, no, well, it's like a mind map, but without the structure. So it's just a big map, you put things on it. So it's an interesting halfway house to what Fabian, I think, quite eloquently described, this, you know, this quite tactile element that's very natural to us. But I found I'm able to sort of let go of that. And the bridging thing is, although I've been working in a sort of 2D space, but I'm using it more, this 2D space in terms of a display, more in the manner that I think I would, it feels closer to VR in a sense than it does actually to me putting things on the floor, funnily enough, because I have the flexibility to do over many, many times. You know, I can't, I mean, unless I destroy the whole file, you know, I can't break anything or I can't lose a page or something. So that's quite interesting. So funnily enough, I feel rather optimistic that despite the fact that you know, we have both a cultural and perhaps an inbuilt sort of feeling for some of these mechanisms and quite physical ways of doing things, I think they can map across quite reasonably. And in fact, that having a VR space, which I think is more important, is this interesting thing that a lot of people who are some distance from this is the thing I've also come to realize, is when you say VR, they're thinking 3D. Well, what, you know, it's 3D. Well, but it's not that. It's the more subtle blend of the familiar, and then this open extensibility, which is the particles we're exploring, because we know the familiar bit, and it's sort of how we gently put these two together. And I mean, this is why I find the explorations we're having really fascinating, because the new ideas it surfaces about how we can do things.
Minority Report plus Zettelkasten, yes. Yeah, I mean, there's so many things. I mean, one thing that I have a problem with is whenever I start writing about our initial thing, there is a thing that is held up in space that can be expanded and collapsed and connected and all that stuff. So is it a post-it note? Is it a graph? Is it a map? Is it Zettelkasten? Is it a document? What is it? I look forward to actually experimenting with these things. So then the question is, where are we practically from actually meeting in Mozilla House? What needs to be done for that to happen?
Nothing. We can meet in Mozilla Hubs right away.
You mean like right now?
We used to.
Like right now.
Okay, why don't you send us a link? And for this one, Raphael can be the flat explorer. How's that, Raphael?
Sure.
If you want, if there is a link way to get into this, then I can put that link on the VR page of our blog, so it's really quite easy to click through. Or how do you want to do it?
Yeah. The beauty also of it, actually, so that Raphael also doesn't feel that in any way, is that it's actually useful not to be all in VR, in the sense that we go back a bit to the initial discussion and the limits of Noda with Mark and bringing files in is, with some people being on desktop, they can drag and drop content, pull in some things that would be harder for people in VR. So anyway, I'll put a link in the chat. Give me just 10 seconds.
While we're doing that, I do find it interesting, this reference to Zettelkasten. I think, oh dear, are we still relying on library cards as our means of discovering, you know, engendering serendipity? It's not that I have anything against Zettelkasten, but I think the fact that Mr. Lerman published a lot of papers has led us down a rather wrong path, because what people have forgotten is he found a means to encourage serendipity in his own work, which doesn't mean that if we all get a set of library cards and fill them out, that we will be as productive as he will.
True.
So, sorry to interrupt. I'll have to go too. So I did post the link in the chat, but if you also want to wait for next time, and I'm very happy to do an introduction or an onboarding or a session just to tinker with Hub. So I don't want to rush through. I still put the link to prove, let's say, that we can get a room like that. But overall, if you want a more onboarding or even to set up a bit before, I'm happy to do that, just not on the spot.
Well, this is just a fun little test. Well, I'm going to go in and see if I can see you real quick.
Does it need? Does it need? Presume it needs what, Chrome or Firefox?
It should work with anything.
Oh, okay.
Firefox, on desktop, on VR,
Yeah.
even on mobile phone, on tablets.
Okay.
Quite empty in here.
Yeah, you just wait. I will ruin your emptiness.
Now Smew and Baikel Teal has joined. Good.
It's so funny. This is our first VR meeting and it's being recorded with us just looking at this, looking silly in headsets. What do you guys think? Wait, hang on. How many people are in headsets now?
No, I'm just using the keyboard.
None so far. Yeah, just you.
It's still
I'm
loading for me.
failing to get in.
This is Glossy Cautious Park, right? I'm a bear. Ta-da.
I
Oh,
feel like I'm in a 1990s MMO.
my gosh. Adam Flatscreener, how are you? All these weird people. I should stand up, shouldn't I? No, I'm gonna keep sitting. Fabienne, how did you get that amazing avatar? You don't look like an animal. You kind of look like you. Can you speak again, please?
I'm trying to speak in both, a bit trickier, but maybe I uploaded myself. Maybe it's not my avatar, but it's me.
Oh yeah, no, I heard what you said. It's just your mouth is moving. So that was quite impressive. Yeah, this is so cool. Hang on, I gotta see if we can do a basic screencast for the record.
Okay, cool.
Come on, connect. Can someone else try it? It's, for some reason, it's not connecting properly for me.
Oh, in terms of your headset.
Yeah. Or even from Flatland, it's okay to have a screenshot or two. Loving the graphs there. So Adam, this is the same house we were in.
Yep.
I made a work of art, everyone.
I love the billboard with doing the instructions. I think that's nicely done.
What's the word I'm looking for?
Absolutely amazing.
No, it's I think bittersweet. It's a little bit of anger and happiness mixed together because of all my time playing video games in these environments, and now everybody's using it, thinking it's incredible.
By the way, reading, when I take this and I'm holding it, I'm over here by the duck. In this environment, it's just totally fine. Spatial hypertext are difficult to explain and to share because we blah, blah, blah. It's just not bad at all. Especially when I can't hold it, because then I get it, you know, where I want it. It's surprising. Oh yeah, did you want to look? Funny looking creatures? And you know, I'm going to throw it in, see how far it goes. Whoa! Sorry about that. Can I catch it? No. Oops. Yeah, I think we'll leave it there.
You break it, you buy it.
Yeah, yeah. I'm about to leave. Boom. Ah. It's shocking.
Dropped
How,
an object and I'm not sure if it crashed. I mean, I just closed it.
I'm also sharing my screen.
Oops.
how do I change the color?
If I do Command Z on Safari, it brings back my last used tab and it undoes what I did in the world.
Oops, I kind of drew on the floor there. How can I erase?
So to open this in Oculus, do I need to use the browser to load this URL?
Yes, yes, you have to use the browser.
See if I can.
And you can use also either hmd.link or in the bottom left, you have
Okay.
invite.
Yeah.
And I think there is a sharing to headset with a code or something like this.
Oh, okay. Well, let's try. Let's see what we can do.
So I apologize, but I really have to go. So I wanted to give a more in-depth introduction, but you guys didn't want to give up. So have fun, and whenever you see something that could be improved or have ideas or whatnot, let me know.
I think we've just turned this into a playground.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Okay, see you
Thanks,
later.
Fabian. Yeah, yeah.
Bye.
It's not fair, is it? The grown-ups get to play.
By the way, I've been given the boots. Look at this. Oops, that's my lamp in real life. That's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if I'll be allowed to use this file.
So I'm seeing this is another turn of the screw where it really helps to have very short domain names and very short page names.
Well, that's why we currently use our blog, because it's easy, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, in the long run, we could do something better.
Hmm. Oh no, I mean all these things will come. As I say, I view it with all degree of equanimity. You know, it can't all arrive at once.
Yeah. So Brandel, I'm going to point to you. Okay, you jumped. I'm going to point to you, Adam. So it doesn't do anything specific when you point to a person. Except we have, oh, that's interesting. Emoticons. They're obviously crucial. All right, well, this was amazing. I'm going to have to go cook for the family now. Family of a lot. 9.
I found a Hearthstone 3D asset.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, leave this one.
Excellent. Cool. Well, this is exciting. Yeah, I will see you guys at the end of the week.
Yeah.
Welcome. It's good to see you again, Raphael.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is
You too,
amazing.
all of you.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.